Hey folks, before we dive into today's podcast, I just wanted to let you know that the new and improved Superpath Pro is up and running and it's awesome. So I'll just give you a quickie overview of what you get. Superpath Pro members get access to a library of courses and content. They get monthly one-on-one calls where we pair you up with a peer and give you a simple agenda. It's an opportunity to meet people and kind of brainstorm and talk through content challenges. We're also doing monthly what we're calling Superpath Socials. So these are group calls. We just did our first one. We had 45 people. There is a sort of large group component, and then there's breakout sessions where you put into smaller groups for sort of specific discussion on a content trend or problem. And then we're also doing private AMAs in the Slack group. So each month we bring in somebody for an AMA and we run that in the Slack group. So all of that is $500 a year. Our goal is to make it the absolute best deal in content marketing. If you want to learn more about it, it's all on the homepage, superpath.co. And if you have any questions, feel free to hit us up. Thanks so much.
Most of our inbound has come from SEO. And I'd say it's been a mix of, the very first time I talked about how we just sort of like, we're going with a quantity approach, publish as many blogs as possible, stay in a tight timeline, like do the quantity thing that everybody right now is sort of arguing against. And then what that ended up with is, a quarter of our blog posts ended up with a good amount of traffic. And then those are driving, so that's driving pipeline.
Hey, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of Content Briefly. Today we've got Eric Doty on, who you probably know best as the manager of the Superpath community. He does an amazing job. We're so thankful for Eric. He also has a full-time job at a SaaS company called Doc, and so we use the first part of this episode to talk about what he's been up to in 2024 and some of his content plans in 2025. We also talk about the relaunch of Superpath Pro, and we've got a Black Friday, Cyber Monday deal for you. So if you want to get 20% off an annual plan, just use the code Black Friday 2024. There'll be a link in the show notes too for you to do that. Just quick update on Superpath Pro. So since we relaunched it, it looks a little different than it used to. So our members get access to our library of courses and content. They get matched up with a peer for a monthly one-on-one call. And we're now hosting monthly group calls, which we're calling Superpath Socials. And the structure of these is basically we get everybody together on one call, and then we send folks into breakout rooms, probably 2 breakout rooms per call. We just did the November one last week. It was fantastic. You get matched up with folks in groups of 4. There's some prompts to get the discussion going, but we hardly needed them. There was just so much to discuss. It was awesome to meet people whose names and faces I've seen in Superpath forever, but have never actually jumped on a call. Eric is also hosting monthly onboarding calls. So if you sign up, you'll get an invite to a monthly onboarding call. He'll walk you through Superpath Pro, answer any of your questions, make sure you've got everything you need to be successful. So if you want to join superpath.co, use the code Black Friday 2024 to get 20% off, and hopefully we'll see you there. Thanks everybody. Take care. This episode of Content Briefly is brought to you by our friends at Stacker. Brands are investing in engaging content to build trust and authority, but distribution is really hard. You're limited to your own channels and outdated advertorial platforms for distribution. Stacker is the first content distribution platform built for earned reach. It enables the scalable distribution of vetted brand stories to a network of news outlets. Brands get to build trust and authority by reaching new audiences through their editorial content, while publishers unlock a library of original stories to engage readers at no cost. Here's what it's like to work with Stacker. You submit stories to its platform, where a team of expert journalists review and optimize every article for maximum reach and engagement. Stacker automates story distribution across its publisher network through news feeds and alerts, ensuring native placement alongside existing coverage. You get earned reach for every story in real-time analytics. Stacker is leading the charge against expensive and outdated advertorials. Its model enables a network of trusted connections between brands and publishers that power a new ecosystem for engaging stories funded by brands, distributed by Stacker, and featured across the world's news outlets. So, if you want to distribute your content to more than 3,900 news outlets all at once, check out stacker.com to learn more. Content Briefly is produced by our friends at Minutia. To learn more about their podcast production service, as well as their other adaptive content marketing services, check out minutia.com in the show notes. Hey everybody, Jimmy from Superpath here today, our esteemed guest, Director of Community here at Superpath. Is that actually your title? I don't know.
I don't think so.
Okay,
community,
you just got promoted.
Head of community. Yeah, I gave myself the head of title.
Okay, you can be VP if you want.
Sure, VP. CEO, is that up for grabs? No.
Not yet.
Okay.
Eric Doty, yeah, thanks for coming back. We come on the podcast every now and then, but I wanted to just do like a check-in on Doc, we talk a lot about Superpath. You run a content program at a SaaS company, which makes you incredibly qualified to run the community. And you have a whole bunch of work that you're working on that people may not really know that much about. So I thought we'd do a little check in on that. And in true Eric Doty fashion, anytime we talk, you send me these awesome notes ahead of time, which I really appreciate. So I feel like you should just publish this Google Doc that you sent me because there's so many good things in here. There's so many good talking points. But maybe to jump in, like give us like 2024 doc content. Like what tab? Like what are you working on? Like I know the product has evolved. Curious how your content strategy has evolved to reflect that, et cetera.
Yeah. So if you listen to the last episode, which I think we recorded early 2023, I basically gave the summary of we had a podcast and we had our blog and we had LinkedIn. And that was basically, and we had case studies. I think that was our entire content strategy at that point. And we had done some product templates. And then we viewed 2024 for Doc as our coming out tour. So, we have all this building quietly content is the way I like to think about it. Like SEO, you're kind of building in the shadows, right? And you hope that people find it. Whereas 2024, like, okay, we got this base of SEO. Now we want to make a splash publicly, make sure people know who we are. And so for us, there was another sort of development on the product side that caused that to be the case, is that we're actually kind of ready to talk about Doc in a more serious way. So the original version of Doc was just like client-facing workspaces where people with like complicated sales cycles or onboarding processes could make a workspace. You have this nice little shared portal between you and your customer. The thing that we've added that makes us like a little more like upmarket and enterprise friendly is now we also have a content management system backed behind that, where companies can manage like all their sales assets. And so that suddenly put us from sort of like this small tool that you could call like a digital sales room, an onboarding portal. And now we're more of like a full-fledged sales enablement platform. And so that puts us now in like the rip and replace of like Seismix and HighSpot and like these big tools that big companies use. And so that sort of, we had to put like our big boy pants on a little bit and become a real company and how we compared ourselves to that market. And so that meant for us, like sponsoring communities was a big thing that we started doing.
Great. I love that. I love when people sponsor communities.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If anyone wants to sponsor a community, go to superpath.co. The strategy we took is we were going to sponsor one community in every single one of our ICPs. So
interesting. That's
we
cool.
sponsored a RevOps community, we sponsored a sales enablement community, we sponsored a sales community, and we actually didn't do a customer success. We sort of stayed in the sales and sales enablement space because that's where Doc was really kind of like, because we added that sales enablement platform thing to it that allowed us to speak to all those groups. And the idea was just that for Doc, when we have our sales team would have a sales cycle and like they'd bring in our prospect would bring in like their sales enablement person. And if they've never heard of Doc, that hurts our conversion rate. Or if they bring in their sales leader and they've never heard of Doc, or they bring in, there's so many, like there's this big buying community or committee that we're selling into. And if each one of those ICPs hasn't heard about us, it's a potential point of friction. So like, you know what, we should make sure that at least everybody on our customer team like knows a little bit about Doc, has seen the logo before, has heard of us. And so we did these community sponsorships that were normally like a webinar and a newsletter sponsorship.
That's really cool. I feel like, I can't remember if we talked about this on the podcast or if this is just an offline conversation where you sort of mentioned doing content ahead of the product a little bit.
Yeah.
So from an SEO perspective, I mean, among other reasons that like as the product catches up, the content is already there, maybe even ranking, and then now you can drop in your calls to action.
Yeah. Our philosophy has kind of been like SEO first so that we can build this moat of like, what are the terms we want to own no matter what the product looks like? Or, I know the product roadmap. So even recently, for example, we don't have AI built into the product yet, but we know that we will, let's say 3 months from now, it's on the product roadmap. So let's own terms like AI, like sales enablement AI, or, whatever product category plus AI. Let's just start building. We can make a blog post about that now that talks about what's the current state in that industry. And then 3 months from now, once we add it to our product, we can go back, update it. And, we've already built some equity there that we can capitalize on. So there's
cool.
We try to get ahead of it a bit. Even if we aren't always ready from a product perspective, we can just drop in the latest update and then suddenly we're ahead of where we would have been if we waited until launch, then made a blog post, and that would lag 3-6 months behind, right?
That's really interesting. Totally candidly, like if you had asked me 2 years ago, 3 years ago, as Doc was kicking off content, like what's our play? That's not what I would have said. I mean, that's one person's opinion. And hearing you explain it, I'm like, oh, I mean, I get it. Like it makes sense. I mean, I'm curious, like how's the SEO going? You know what I mean? Like, are you finding that it's harder than it was? You know what I mean? I feel like you hear that a lot now. Like, do you plan to continue investing in SEO like you have been?
Yeah. So I'd say it's gone well because we have our sales pipeline is full. It's growing. We've hit our revenue targets, and almost all of our inbound comes from SEO.
Dang,
and
that's
then
awesome.
some LinkedIn brand building things, and of course, talking about this sort of coming out tour we've done this year. But most of our inbound has come from SEO, and I'd say it's been a mix of like. The very first time we talked, I talked about how we just sort of like we're going with a quantity approach, publish as many blogs as possible, stay in a tight timeline, like do the quantity thing that everybody right now is sort of arguing against. And
Yeah,
then what that ended up with is, a quarter of our blog posts ended up with good amount of traffic. And then those are driving, so that's driving pipeline. And so in terms of like what's worked for us for SEO, I'd say like very close to the product blog posts. So how to build a sales proposal, how to build a pricing quote, like best practices around things that are really directly related to our tool, where we can put videos and screenshots and demos of the product right in the blog post and just sort of answer the questions with the product. Those have worked really well. Some things that didn't work well that we thought would be really cool is when we did sort of like software posts, right? Where you'd have your classic, the typical thing that ranks well in SEO is you have a listicle, it would have 10 tools. They would just sort of, here's a list of the tools in that category. And we thought, well, it would be way cooler if we actually did some like analysis, or we said, if you're this type of company, here's 5 tools, or and we did like a couple more layers of analysis, and all those posts just did terribly. Like
dang,
what Google, and so it sucks because like what's common sense, or maybe not common sense, but what's your intuition as a content marketer of what would be better for it doesn't always make it better for SEO, which is sort of the pain, the pain of doing SEO is sometimes you just have to play the game. And so, we took some of our articles and went back and just made it like a plain listicle, and that worked better. So lesson learned. But that's why you got to be in the trenches, and you can't just do like theoretical, nobody wants this, everyone wants this. Okay, that's true. But if it doesn't rank, then no one will ever find it. So if you're
that's so
building things where like the distribution channel. And another thing that was surprising to me, or that's worked really well, is that we have like anything that's sort of like a template or very product driven. So like if sales proposal template, things like that, those articles have performed well. And something that's really surprising to me is I never thought we'd be able to get product landing pages to rank well. Like for example, like onboarding, a customer onboarding platform. I think we own all the number one terms for like customer onboarding tool, and it's our actual product landing page. But I would have never bet in a million years, I would have thought all the top results would be like G2, a blog post of all the best onboarding tools. And so that made me take a step back and go, oh crap, I need to build like this whole horizontal of product landing pages that we don't have, because I was prioritizing blog posts. So I'm not sure why. I think maybe sometimes people just want a tool and they don't want to read a blog of 10 options. They just want to read they just want to find Doc, and then they're like, oh yeah, this is what I wanted. I'll start a free trial.
That's so interesting. I mean, it makes total sense.
Yeah. So I think my takeaway from the SEO perspective is that like best practices are one thing, and sort of logic and what should work is one thing, but sometimes you just have to try a whole, like for one topic, we do a blog post, we'd make a template, we'd make a landing page. And as long as we covered all our bases there, whatever the search intent was, like I'd have a gut feeling on which one of those 4 things was going to rank like for that particular keyword. But sometimes it's going to be the page, sometimes it's going to be the blog. And I couldn't really predict with great regularity what that would be. So a lesson is just to, diversify what you're putting out there from an SEO perspective, and hopefully it works.
That's cool. That's really interesting. I remember like way back when I worked at QuickBooks, we had a whole SEO team, which is really helpful to have like a bunch of really smart people who can help you. But one of the things that they would do is they would do their keyword research, and then they would make a recommendation for how to satisfy the query. And I was so used to working at small companies that in my mind, it's just you create content. That's the only tool you have, and they would say, oh, this one needs a product page. This one we should build a wizard calculator or thingy. This one probably needs a video. And I was like, whoa, that's
Yeah,
crazy.
exactly.
Actually, it's a huge company. They can afford to do this kind of things, but then it's going to help my perspective out a little bit too. Like content isn't always the answer, or at least blog posts aren't always the answer.
Yeah. Or another lesson too is that there were, for our product category, like for example, digital sales room. Like, okay, we want to own digital sales room. That's one term that people would describe our product. So let's build this like amazing guide, 3,000 words, all this content. But what people actually wanted is they either wanted the list of the best digital sales room tools, or they wanted like example digital sales room. Like they want to see one, right? And they want to know what it is. So there's like the what is, like what we should have done is what is the digital sales room, short post, show an example, maybe even have our product demo there, and then have a list of the best tools. But instead we wrote like this huge best practices guide for all, like how to use digital sales rooms. And that's a great asset to have from like a customer enablement perspective, but it wasn't the right thing to do for SEO. So now that I'm a few years in, I'm like sort of repurposing, let's take this, let's make that a webinar. Let's make this a shorter blog post. Let's make this like a top tools post. And then once you see the sort of the data trickle in, you can make smarter decisions about what people actually want.
That's cool. That's really cool. And how about you personally? Like one of the things we talked about a lot on your first time on the podcast was this kind of one person content team thing. If Doc one day IPOs and has like 750 employees, like are you efficient enough that you could still be a one person content team? Like has your role expanded? Like how I guess either your role has to expand over time or you are really, really careful about what you say yes to.
Yeah. So I'll answer that in two parts. So first of all, the goal always with Doc has been start a channel, spin it up, and get it efficient. So blog post, good, that's running. Once I've like compressed my time down at how much time that takes me. Now we can add a podcast. Great, that's running. Now I feel pretty good about it. That condenses down in time. And so over time, you like add a thing, compress it down, and I can add channels. Eventually, I guess there's a cap on how much I can do as an individual person. Like things can only be optimized so far. And like I think this year was a discovery of that for me. So for example, like we started sponsoring these webinars and communities. And so each one of those, we had to like spin up a webinar. We had to do all this follow-up. Like I'm the full marketing team. I'm not just the content team. So I also have to like help our CEO build the deck. I have to do lead follow-up, all those things. And a lot of those had like one-off efforts that were just time consuming. And so it like hurt the rest of the things that I already had optimized, like blogs and podcasts. And so basically we spread ourselves thin with a lot of different, we launched an influencer program that went okay. We started doing in-house product webinars, which like went okay. And so we did all these things that like they were executed decently well and they performed decently well. But ultimately I think like adding too many channels, it didn't hurt. Like our content marketing has been successful and our marketing program is successful. But I think it could have been more successful if we just like, if I stayed narrower because I'm a one person team and just executed really well on 3 or 4 things versus because every idea is good. Like if all of our marketing ideas executed properly would work. But the challenge is, will they work if you do them all at the same time? And the answer is normally no. So that's been like the lesson for the one person team is that, be very, very careful when adding something new because it's more likely to like damage the existing things you're working on. And, can you take that hit? So that's like one way of it. And then I think the other way of looking at it is our company is growing. Like we're adding more salespeople. We're going to have like a 3-4 person sales team soon. And I've been able to keep up from a marketing perspective. And so I think I think content is the last thing we're going to hire if we hire more of a marketing team. Like what we really need is events people, growth people, like things around it, like more of a complete marketing team. But in terms of content, like I think I'm doing pretty well. Just me and the CEO.
Yeah.
Working on that.
You can always, content's a little different, I feel like, than some other marketing disciplines in that like you can steer the ship and bring on freelancers to help make it happen. Like because the production is what is the really time consuming part of it.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is when you're at a company for longer, like you just build a really good stable of freelancers.
Yeah.
So now I'm 2 years in and when I joined, it was like find 10 people who can help me ASAP and some of those people are a good fit, some of them don't. And you sort of like churn is probably an aggressive word, but you sort of like churn through freelancers over time and you just get settled with a really great team. So now I have a person I can just throw like odd job tasks on the website. I have a person who helps the podcast. I have like 10 people writing blogs for us. Now I have this huge like army behind me where my life is like, I can scale myself up and down much easier at any given moment. And I'm constantly asking people about their capacity. If I doubled this, could you handle it? And then if the answer is no, then I have to go out and get another person and just be proactive about that. And so I've learned like my job as a one-person team is keeping everybody else busy and making sure that I'm never the blocker to projects getting started. So it's better to like get all these projects started and out in the world than, finish or optimize something sometimes, because I just need to make sure that every single one of my resources is actively moving so that I'm not the one slowing it down.
Yeah, I love it. What's 2025 looking like? What's on your radar?
Yeah. So on the note of being sort of sticking with what's working well is we're trying to add new channels and add new projects, but keep them super tightly related to things that are already working well. So for example, we have our SEO is going well. We have like good website authority. So like what additional SEO channels can we add? And so one thing we're working on is this revenue archives, which is basically going to be a big example of sales assets, a big example library of sales assets. So we'll have, here's 20 sales decks from real companies. Here's 20 ROI reports. Here's like basically any type of sales asset that would be used, because that's something you could embed in a doc workspace or put in your like doc content library. It's something that sales enablement people are always looking for. And what I've noticed as we've been doing like our blog strategy is that there's so much search volume for like X examples. People want sales deck examples, people want ROI report examples, et cetera. And most of what's out there is blog posts that don't actually have examples.
Right.
Or it's just really hard to find these things because companies are guarded about their sales assets. And so for the past year, I've just been, every time I come across a good example of one of these things, I've built my own sort of private database, and now we're making that public. And so that will be
cool.
And it also, I think, fights against SEO or AI a little bit, because AI can steal answers to questions, but it can't necessarily steal like, here's a great example of something, and then they have to still show something, right? So I want, like, basically my philosophy now is like, if we build things on our website, like tools and example libraries, things like that, that's harder for AI to replace to a degree, depending on what it is.
I like that.
So we're trying to build just like a really helpful asset. And it's not just like an SEO thing, even though it does have SEO as a distribution channel. It's also just a really like beautiful asset for us to have on our website.
I love that.
And we can reuse it. And so now we can write blog posts where we say, here's 10 examples of sales decks. And we just have our own, I can just give that over to a freelancer. There's already a library built out there. They don't have to go out and do that research. And so it can be reused for blog content as well. So so again, it's like, how do I compound on things I already have? The other thing we're adding is like, we've done almost only SEO at this point from a content perspective, which is okay, but we need to, diversify our strategy a bit. And so we're going to take our podcast, which is really awesome, but like only so many people listen to it, and turn that into more of an editorial newsletter, because we've still never taken the time. We've been really hesitant to build like serial things that we have to keep up with. But now we think we're ready to handle a newsletter. Like I said, like I've got the blog optimized, got the podcast optimized. Now we can handle a regular newsletter. And so we're going to take our podcast and turn it into sort of like a first round review style, like editorialized version of the podcast.
Okay. I love this. I feel like this is such a great opportunity for any company who has a podcast. Like, it's just so rich with stories and personality and opinion. It's like, what can you do with that? Well, this would be a great example of what you could do with it.
Yeah. And I feel like so far I just had an email list where you say, do you want to subscribe to the podcast? Here's the podcast. And, it gives 3 summary bullets of the episode, and that was it. But now we want to take it that you don't even have to listen to the show. We just a full, what's the storytelling version of what is the story of the episode? And so it doesn't have to include the whole thing. It could include additional outside research. It's just a really nice piece of like well-researched content about.
Yeah.
In our case,
Love it.
Yeah. So our podcast is called Grow and Tell, and it's for go-to-market leaders. So it's sales, customer success, and marketing. And it's normally a story of how that leader grew their arm of the business at a particular company. So we have like sales leader at Facebook. We have, customer success at GitHub, and they tell a specific story versus they're not normally advertising the company they work for now. So they can kind of get more into the weeds. And so it also makes good success stories.
Content briefly.
Yeah, I know. Well, you had one recently with Michael who talked about Clary. That was a good one, I thought.
That's true. Yeah. Interesting. I like the idea of like getting people to say what they really want to say by talking about their last job.
Yeah. And so we're adding that kind of like subscription worthy content, which I know is not revolutionary, but it makes going to the one person thing again, it makes use of something we already have, which is our podcast. We can repurpose it for another format, but make sure it's actually like also good in that format and not just because so far we've done like video clips and things like that, which is great for distribution, but we want to give people also, we have lots of blog traffic now to our site and we want to give them something. If they're not signing up for the product, we want to give them something else to subscribe to. And the newsletter would be great for that.
Totally. Awesome. I don't know if this episode will go out before or after Tracy Wallace. We were talking about her Klaviyo 2025 plans, and she actually said something very similar, which was like, kind of boring. Like what we're planning on doing is kind of boring. We're going to do more events, more webinars and content, and we're going to just make that content as good as we possibly can.
Yeah.
That's the plan. I like it. It's kind of like back to basics.
Yeah. And I'll say webinars too. Like we did webinars this year, and then we did both the sponsored community ones I've talked about, and we did product webinars. And I was surprised how effective those were, not necessarily at drumming up like huge amounts of signups or anything, but to make like something that's good enough to make people come and sit through for 45 minutes about your product. That has so much repurposing value for your blog, for social posts, for everything. Like that is, I've talked a lot about before, like the podcast is a really nice source of original sort of thought leadership or interviews. But I was surprised too at how much product webinars were just useful. Now I can just give someone a product webinar where we talked about, how to set up a sales room and just say, go back to our sales room article and add all of this. Like, and it's 10 times better than what I wrote as a freelancer back in the day for the article, because it's our CEO showing you how to do all these things. That was a really surprising. And then we got lots of, it also became an asset that our sales team could send people or prospects that were like, oh, I'm not sure how difficult the implementation will be, like those kinds of sales objections. And instead of sending them to like an SEO blog post that is, wordy, we can give them a webinar they can sign up for and watch through. And it's been a really nice piece of content to have that actually has helped us at kind of like every stage of the funnel.
Dang, that's cool.
Yeah. I would have thought, webinar is boring, but it definitely has been a good asset for us to have.
That's interesting. I wonder, hearing you say that and then hearing Tracy talk about it too, I think maybe I was sort of stuck on the like virtual event fatigue thing, kind of like coming out of COVID, it was like, who wants to sit on another Zoom call or virtual like everyone's down with that. But then it's like, maybe we've all sort of settled into like, okay, remote is like, we're really doing this. Like for most people anyways, like we're not going back, and we are craving connections with other people. And like, this is actually like a really cool way to deliver that.
Yeah. And I think this is an aside on that point, but a trap I think people fell into is like, okay, we did a webinar. Now we're going to repurpose it into 10 clips, one blog post, blah, blah, blah. And I thought that's how it was going to go for us at the start. But I realized that is kind of a waste of time for a lot of, like if there wasn't something really gold in there, just move on and do the next thing. But for example, we had we had a panel discussion where it was our CEO, our head of sales, and a customer. And this was like a sponsored community panel where the three of them were talking. And suddenly the customer just gave like an amazing doc testimonial, just sort of on the fly. And that was way better than the case studies I did. Like, those are pretty good, but they're like tooting my own horn. But the live testimonial in this panel was just like an amazing soundbite. And then I took that and I put that on social and I put it in our sort of sales enablement library that we have in Doc. And that was like the example of repurposing done right. But I think when I started, I thought every single webinar we were going to have to like piece it into all these chunks and just throw it out there and just like throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And, I still do that for the podcast, but it was a lesson that, there's moments of gold in these things that if you're just like paying attention and you pull them out and don't distract yourself with having to do it every time, that it was really valuable for us.
Nice. Okay. I feel we should talk about Superpath for a minute. And here's my awkward segue. How do you have time to work on Superpath also? You have a lot going on.
Yeah. People always ask me that. And the answer I always give is that I'm a one-person team. I don't have like peers to turn to. I don't have like sounding boards. So to me, they're not as disconnected as like, here's all my doc time and here's all my Superpath time. Like the things I'm not necessarily like the work I'm doing to manage the Superpath community, but like being in there, being able to bounce questions off people, that feeds back into my work. Doing this podcast and having to talk about my content strategy and what I've been doing for the past 2 years, just writing it down, made me reflect on all these things I'm doing wrong and doing right. Like they're so interconnected that I think for me, it's just a super valuable exercise to always be doing both. In terms of like, how do I have time to do both? I mean, before I was doing freelance writing all the time. And so I would do my full-time job and then do an extra 10 to 15 hours a week freelance writing.
Oh, wow.
And
that's a lot. That's pretty,
like
pretty like
it's crazy.
Energy intensive.
Yeah. And it's energy intensive and it's the same kind of work you're doing full-time and part-time. Right. And so eventually it starts to drain on you. Yeah. And you're starting to plan your day like, should I avoid writing today for like full-time job when I know I have freelance coming? And that's obviously not the way you should be doing it. Right. So for me, Superpath is like a different muscle that I get to work out for, how do you grow a community? How do you keep people engaged? How do you facilitate events? There's all these different skills that I'm not doing in my day job. And so to me, it's energizing to do both. How do you build how do you build stuff in Zapier that, all these crazy one-on-one invites we have to send out. And so for me, that's how I like, so I'm taking time to do both, but it feels energizing rather than sort of sucking additional energy out of me is the way I've always thought about it.
I like it. I'm also going to clip the first part of what you said as a testimonial. Speaking of repurposing content for other platforms. I feel
testimonial by the guy who runs the community. Yeah.
yeah, sure. I guess that's the sentiment is there though. So I guess I promise we won't turn this into an infomercial, but I feel like folks may appreciate some of the behind the scenes. So we relaunched Superpath Pro in October 1st out the door. So we're recording this right before Thanksgiving. We've got almost 2 full months. And, you're running this. I feel like I'm functioning more as a member than anything else. And it's been great. So for people who are not familiar or maybe a little sprucing up, the new Superpath Pro is really built around connecting with other people, to echo some of the things we were just talking about. It's about monthly one-on-one calls. You get matched up with a peer each month. And then Eric's launched these Superpath socials, which are group calls with breakout sessions. And we've done 2 of those now. And they've been great. We're collecting a lot of feedback because like this is new for us also. But I mean, I've already met a bunch of new people whose names and faces I've seen in Slack forever, but never really knew. And the format makes it really easy to just jump into conversations. It's not awkward. We're all kind of here for the same reasons, and it just makes it like super easy and kind of lightweight. It's great.
Yeah. Oh, the socials have been great. That was the number one piece of feedback when it was actually a nice sort of reset for Superpath when I joined because it gave people the opportunity to give feedback to a new person, I think. And so, it's like, rather than saying like, what is Jimmy doing wrong? It's like, okay, like I'm here now. What do you want? Like, tell me what you would love to happen in Superpath. And I heard 100 times over that people just wanted more opportunities to connect with other content marketers. Like that was the main, the content is great, but webinars and education sessions and courses, that's all great. But what the number one reason people were in Superpath and stayed in Superpath, it's like, it's my job to keep people in the community too, right? Is that people really love the socials and they love the opportunity to connect with other people. So they love the one-on-ones. They wanted more of that. And then they wanted more opportunities to connect. So we introduced the socials where we put people in breakouts. And yeah, like you said, it's been awesome. The first time we like rapidly made people meet a ton of people really quickly. That was kind of interesting, maybe overwhelming. And then the second one we just did, they were longer. It was like 20-minute sessions of 3 or 4 people in a group. And that was, it was much easier to get into sort of deeper conversations.
Yeah.
It's enough time to express anxieties and help someone. You need 20 minutes to do that.
Totally. I was actually so surprised that, the first group that I was in last time, we actually talked a lot about AI. You know what I mean? So we talked a lot about that for 20 minutes. And then I was sort of expecting that to carry over to the next one. But then the next one was like a completely different discussion, which was awesome. It wasn't like rehashing the things I had just hashed out with other people. It was like totally different based on the exact same prompt, which was, what are your 2025 plans or something like that? You know?
I think I had the exact same too. I had the first one, everyone talked about AI and like, what are you really doing with AI was kind of the question.
Yeah.
And then the second one was, I've got a leader who is, it's tough getting buy-in with like, what do you guys do? Or like, my leader's expectations. So yeah, again, same prompt, totally different.
So cool. We're actually, speaking of that, we've got a lot of feedback. Some people want more. I mean, we may end up rolling these out twice a month instead of just once. And then, maybe there's always a possibility we do other things to help people connect to. Like we've talked about speed networking events in the past. I feel like that could be fun. Like deliberately, like quick, 30 minutes, meet 5 people type thing in a one-on-one setting. Or maybe we bring back office hours, which we used to do. Basically, just tell us what you want. We'll make it happen. Like that's the new Superpath Pro is like, we're just going to give you what you want.
Yeah. I'll say too, the member pool is a lot bigger because we had like Slack only subscribers and we pulled all those people in. And so one-on-ones too, I think before there was a smaller pool, now there's a way bigger pool. So people are just meeting like a wider variety of people over the course of the year, which will be awesome too.
Totally. And then I guess one other thing, we got this app up and running. I know there's been a couple technical issues, so we apologize for that. But we have a lot of really cool ideas for the app. Like the reason we're not doing this in Circle or Mighty Networks or other places is that we actually really want to build like functionality into this app that you can't build into a community tool. So like I'll slightly hesitate to like tease too much of that because like I'm not a product manager. Developers are expensive. Like I don't know exactly the timeline here, but like we have a lot of cool things that will be coming to the app. And if nothing else, you get single sign-on now. So however you log into Slack, you log in the same way to the app. You get the courses, the event calendar, and then more stuff being added there too. So send feedback on that as well. Like if there's stuff you want in there, just let us know.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And it just makes the possibility like we're no longer handcuffed by what does Slack support or what does so-and-so tool. Like we can build things for content marketers and, there isn't a networking tool for content marketers that exists. So we're building our own.
Totally. And then I guess one last thing, I don't know when this episode's going to go out. I haven't really thought about that yet. So if it is on Cyber Monday, take advantage of our 20% off deal. And if you catch this later, just hit us up. You know what I mean? Like if you catch this episode a couple weeks later, just shoot an email to Eric or I, Jimmy@superpath.co or Eric@superpath.co. We'll get you taken care of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Feel free to send me a Slack and we always figure it out for people.
Yeah, we'll take care of you. Eric, thank you for all that you do. Seriously, I feel like I owe you a huge debt of gratitude for all the energy and life you've brought to Superpath over the last couple of years, and then particularly the last couple of months. So seriously appreciate you.
People are probably really sick of hearing from me. So thanks for having me on the show again. But I appreciate that. No, and thank you. The community is so awesome. And like I said, it energizes me and just makes me be able to deal with like the highs and lows of being a content marketer, I think with like much more stability. And I love it for that.
Hopefully we can give that same thing to other people too. So you know where to find it, superpath.co. Thanks, Eric. We will see you in Slack.